cspan.org. Going live to Capitol Hill now as the U.S. Senate is gaveling back in after being in recess for about an hour.
Or what's happening in Iran.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Madam President, I have 9 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that these requests be agreed to and that these requests be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Madam President, I request to speak as if in morning business for up to 10 minutes.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam President, I come to the floor today to discuss the first policy-focused legislation I am introducing as a senator. I believe it will be a win for Massachusetts and a win for the nation. But before I do so, I'd like to comment briefly about another win last night for Massachusetts and for Red Sox Nation everywhere. Behind the mighty bat of Big Papi, the tireless and tough arms of John Lester and John Lackey and Koji Uehara, and the incredible power of the Beard. This unlikely Red Sox team took us from last in the division to first in the world. For many of us in Massachusetts, this wasn't just about baseball, because on Patriots Day, when the Sox play in the morning and New England comes together for a day of celebration, evil visited our city at the Boston Marathon this year. And while this team can't bring back the lives we lost or heal the wounds inflicted, it did what no other team besides the Red Sox can do. It reaffirmed our common bond in Massachusetts, in New England, and with Red Sox Nation fans everywhere. It's often said that baseball is a game of inches, but it is also a game that can span miles, bringing people together across entire communities and cultures, bridging differences and building friendships. That's what Red Sox baseball did for Boston, for Massachusetts, and for New England this year when we needed it the most. The Red Sox gave us the chance to all raise our hands in triumph once again together as one. The Red Sox came back to win in a dozen games that they never gave up on. They fought to the last pitch in every game, showing the resilience that reflected the response of an entire city and region after the Marathon tragedy. And in doing so, they gave us so much more than entertainment. They gave us hope, something to cheer for, and something else to talk about at a time of deep sadness in our region. As the song says, don't worry about a thing, because every little thing's going to be all right. Well, watching the celebrations last night in and around Fenway, and especially on Boylston Street, just a brief distance from the marathon finish, reminds me of how proud I am to represent this great city and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the United States Senate. The Sox team that won the World Series in 2004 allowed us to release 86 years of disappointment. This year's team allowed us to cheer again after months of mourning. And for that, we congratulate and thank the 2013 World Series champions, the Boston Red Sox. And now, Mr. President, Madam President, as for the other win for Massachusetts, today I am introducing my first major piece of legislation as a United States Senator. My bill, the American Renewable Energy and Efficiency Act, will allow every single American to have access to clean energy and money-saving efficiency. In our slow economic recovery, there has been one very bright spot in Massachusetts and the national economy: the incredible growth of clean energy, energy efficiency, and the jobs that come with these industries. According to the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, our state alone has gained 20,000 jobs in these sectors since 2010, with another 10,000 new jobs expected in the next year alone. Massachusetts has become the nation's most energy-efficient state. Boston is ranked as the nation's most energy-efficient city. Our shores will host the first offshore wind farm with a new construction terminal built in New Bedford, allowing our fishermen to work alongside our wind energy workers. Massachusetts is number 7 in the nation in deploying solar energy, even though we're more well known for the perfect storm than perfectly sunny days. These advances, these jobs, these technologies have flourished in Massachusetts because we have set the right policies and encouraged our companies to lead. Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick set high goals for clean energy deployment in our state, and we've already surpassed them. Boston Mayor Tom Menino wanted Boston to be known as green for just more than the green monster in Fenway Park, and he has delivered. Boston is now the greenest city in the United States. That's why I am introducing my first bill as a United States Senator to take our Massachusetts leadership and make it national. My bill would require that electricity sold to American consumers increasingly be generated using renewable sources like wind and solar, hydro, geothermal, and biomass. By 2025, the bill would require 25% of our electricity to come from the free fuel of the sun, the wind, and the earth. And since the cheapest and cleanest power plant is the one we never have to build, my bill would also require utilities to put people to work on large-scale energy efficiency programs. My bill would build on the efforts of Massachusetts and the 30 other states that already require utilities to provide customers with minimal amounts of renewable electricity and ensure that America joins the 118 other nations that have already established renewable energy goals. My bill would quadruple renewable energy production in the United States. It would create more than 400,000 new jobs. We can put steel workers and iron workers and electricians back to work building the new energy backbone for America from Massachusetts to Montana. The energy efficiency measures in my bill would save the average household $39 per year on utility bills, and it would reduce carbon dioxide pollution by the equivalent output of 120 coal-fired power plants, helping our efforts to battle the advancing tide of dangerous climate change. A renewable electricity standard passed the House of Representatives twice while I was a member of the body, as recently as 2009. And it has passed the Senate 3 times since 2002. Before it was held hostage over the Affordable Care Act, the Shaheen-Portman energy efficiency bill showed that there is real bipartisan support for energy efficiency here in the Senate. These are policies that should be embraced and not blocked. And if we do not take these steps, we will lose the international race to dominate the multi-trillion-dollar clean energy sector. Right now, China has already overtaken the United States as the #1 most attractive place to invest in renewable energy. 60% of all new companies going public in the clean energy sector are doing so in China. More than 100,000 clean energy jobs are being created there annually. China now has more wind capacity installed than any other country, and they produce 2/3 of the world's solar panels. It is time for our country to scale up our clean energy deployment and innovation. It is also time to take a look at revolutionary approaches to driving that innovation. All too often, we are unable to move clean energy-related discoveries and breakthroughs out of the labs and into the marketplace. That's the problem that my Clean Tech Consortium legislation addresses. I have included this bill as part of the Manufacturing Jobs in America initiative launched this week by Senator Coons and some of my Democratic colleagues. My bill would fertilize America's innovation ecosystem so that scientific breakthroughs can more effectively navigate the so-called valley of death between the lab and the factory and reach their commercial potential. America's universities and research institutions are truly national treasures. And our venture capitalists and entrepreneurs are the sharpest of the world. When we sprinkle the right mix of scientific brainpower and capitalist drive, we get something uniquely American and extremely potent in terms of its economic impact. My Clean Tech Consortia bill, which I will soon be introducing, will link investors with inventors, professors with producers, and get clean energy out of the laboratories and into the factories. That's the type of partnership we need with the private sector right now in our country. The other bill that I have introduced in this package is the Manufacturing Jobs for America initiative, and which I will also be introducing soon, and it is called the Build America Bonds Initiative. Here's how it works, and here's what it does. When a state or local government wants to build and renovate schools and bridges and roads and hospitals, they need financing, and they issue a bond. Investors buy those bonds, giving the state capital to hire workers and update infrastructure, and investors get a return in the form of interest. Build America Bonds says to state and local governments, we will help with the interest payments and help put more Americans back to work. From the inception of this program in April 2009 to when it expired at the end of 2010, there were 2,275 separate bonds issued nationwide, which supported more than $181 billion of financing for new public capital infrastructure projects such as bridges, schools, and hospitals. Build America bonds were a huge success in Massachusetts. My state issued close to $5 billion in bonds. Build America bonds helped finance Massachusetts' accelerated bridge program, which repaired and rebuilt hundreds of structurally deficient bridges. Another example of projects included a new laboratory at UMass Amherst, a new courthouse in Salem, a new building at Worcester State Hospital, improving energy efficiency and reducing costs. I plan to work with my good friends, Senator Wyden and Congressman Neal, both leaders on this issue, to ensure we continue to invest in both our infrastructure and our future. These are the kinds of programs that will put America back to work. I want American workers to build and export wind turbines and solar panels that say made in America instead of the American economy importing millions of barrels of oil a day that say made by OPEC. I want American inventors dreaming up the newest energy technologies that convert patent applications for a prototype into job applications on the factory floor. I want American workers repairing our crumbling bridges, roads, and schools. We are in a terrestrial technology and manufacturing
Senator's
race.
time has expired. Unanimous.
Madam President, may I have an additional 30 seconds to just finish my statement?
Is there objection? Without objection.
I thank you. We are in a terrestrial technology and manufacturing race as important as the celestial race President Kennedy began 50 years ago. These are three of the programs that will put America into a new economic orbit, looking down on our competitors. We should pass all three and put America back to work. I yield back the balance of my time.
Madam President.
The Republican whip.
Madam President, I want to offer my congratulations to the senator from Massachusetts for the World Series victory of the Boston Red Sox. And I know it's a happy day in his state. Madam President, I want to return to the issue of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, because even though we had an earlier cloture vote where the Senate decided to continue debate and not close off debate on this issue, I anticipate that the Majority Leader will bring to the Senate floor the other two nominees which have now cleared the Senate Judiciary Committee for the 3 seats that President Obama has said he wants to appoint and is asking for advice and consent of the Senate. But I want to make sure that we all understand exactly what this debate is all about. At this very moment, there are plenty of U.S. appellate courts that urgently need judges to handle their existing caseload. And as my friend, the distinguished presiding officer knows, former Attorney General, there are a lot of district courts around the country, federal district courts that could use additional personnel because they are what are called judicial emergencies, because they have such heavy caseloads and they need more help. So why in the world would we want to add more judges to a court that doesn't have enough work for them to do? And that's exactly what this debate is all about. It's not about the specific nominees. It's not an ideological battle that we're all familiar with, so much as it is one of practical economics. Between 2005 and 2013, the total number of written decisions per active judge on the D.C. Circuit declined by 27%. So from 2005 to 2013, the number of written decisions per active judge went down by almost a third, 27%. And the number of appeals filed with the court went down by 18%. As of September 2012, both the total number of appeals filed with the D.C. Circuit and the total number of appeals decided by the D.C. Circuit per active judge were 61% below the national average. You can see from this chart that's been prepared by the ranking member, Senator Grassley's office, how the 13 circuit courts of appeals compare when it comes to the number of cases or appeals filed per active judge. Now, this is in red as the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals has the lightest caseload, the fewest number of cases of any circuit court in the nation. Conversely, the 11th Circuit out of Atlanta has 778 cases or appeals filed per active judge. So I don't know why you would want to take 3 new judges and assign them to the court with the lowest caseload per active judge. Makes absolutely no sense. By the way, the average for the circuit courts, all 13 circuit courts, is 383 cases or appeals filed per active judge. Again, the average being for the entire nation, 383 appeals per active judge. The D.C. Circuit, to which President Obama wants to add 3 additional new judges, it's 149, almost a third. Well, one other sort of unique thing about the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, while many of these courts are very busy and indeed are overworked relative to the other circuit courts like the D.C. Circuit Court, this is perhaps the only court in the nation that literally took a 4-month break between May and September of this year because they could. They didn't have enough work to do. So they took a break. They took 4 months off between May and September. So the bottom line, Madam President, is that this court is not one that needs more judges. In fact, one of the current members of the D.C. Circuit told Senator Grassley, our colleague from Iowa, he said, quote, "If any more judges are added now, there wouldn't be enough work to go around." So what's this all about? Why are my friends across the aisle ignoring the needs of other appellate courts and other jurisdictions around the country that have, as the Office of Judicial Administration terms it, judicial emergencies, because they have so much work to do that they need help? Why are my colleagues on the other side of the aisle ignoring those courts where there are needs in favor of a court where there is no demonstrated need? Well, here's perhaps one reason why. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeal, being located in Washington, D.C., does have a unique caseload. I would say the types of cases they consider are not particularly more complicated. I don't really buy that argument. Many of them are administrative appeals, which, as a presiding officer knows, is highly deferential to the administrative body. So usually it's an abuse of discretion standard, which is, as I say, very deferential. But the reason why the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals is the subject of so much focus, whether it's a Republican president or a Democratic president, is because it's often called the second most important court in the nation by virtue of its docket, the kinds of cases it decides. Indeed, this was a court that, before the Supreme Court held portions of the Affordable Care Act unconstitutional, they actually affirmed the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act, primarily because they didn't feel it was their prerogative to hold it unconstitutional rather than and defer to the Supreme Court, which ultimately had the ability to overrule old cases and reach that result. But this court wields tremendous influence over regulatory and constitutional matters. And the truth is, and I'll show you a few quotes in a moment, that Senator Reid and the President hope that by adding 3 more judges to the court, they can transform it into a rubber stamp for the Obama administration agenda. Right now, there's a balance on the court. There's 4 judges who were nominated by a Republican president. There are 4 judges on the court nominated by a Democratic president. Yet my friends across the aisle have been condemning the D.C. Circuit Court without justification, in my view. They've been condemning it as a bastion of partisanship and extreme ideology. Well, the facts just don't bear that out. As I said, remember, this is the same court that actually upheld the President's health care law as constitutional. And it's the same court that twice upheld the President's executive order on embryonic stem cell research. And it's the same court that's ruled in favor of the Obama administration in the majority of environmental cases that have come before it, including ones related to the regulation of greenhouse gases, ethanol-blended gasoline, and mountaintop removal coal mining. Well, that doesn't sound like a radical ideological court to me. It sounds like it's a court doing its job without fear or favor, in an impartial way, administering justice, not engaging in crass partisanship or tilting at ideological windmills. Of course, the critics of the current court don't mention those decisions that I just mentioned when they're criticizing the court. Instead, they point to 3 separate rulings where the Obama administration did not fare so well. The first one of those was a ruling that struck down the Securities and Exchange Commission proxy access rule, which has to do with corporate governance. Now, I know that sounds like a lot of mumbo-jumbo, but basically the court found that the agency had failed to conduct a proper cost-benefit analysis. We all understand what that means. The statute actually requires the court to conduct a cost-benefit analysis, but the court didn't do it. It ignored the letter of the law, and the D.C. Circuit ordered the administrative agency to follow the law and engage in that kind of cost-benefit analysis. The second ruling that the critics of the current court point out came in August of 2012 when the court invalidated the Environmental Protection Agency's cross-state air pollution rule, saying it would impose massive emissions reduction requirements on certain states without regard to the limits imposed by the statutory text. In other words, when an administrative agency like the Environmental Protection Agency issues rules and regulations, they don't do so in a vacuum or in a void. They're necessarily guided by the authority given to them and the limitations imposed upon them by the laws that Congress writes. Now, they're free within that statutory mandate to write rules and regulations, but they're not free to ignore them or to engage in rulemaking that basically goes counter to the direction of Congress. So in this case, one that's cited by some of the critics, the court held the Clean Air Act does not give the EPA boundless authority or unlimited authority to regulate emissions. So requiring a court requiring an administrative agency to work within its legal authority, I think is just common sense. Otherwise, you'd have administrative agencies free to chart their own path without regard to any kind of guidance or legitimacy conferred by Congress in terms of regulation. And remember, these administrative agencies are very powerful entities. Some say they're the fourth branch of government. And there's a lot of concern that I have, that many people have, about overregulation and its damage to our economy. So the very least the courts ought to do is make sure that they're operating within their mandate and the limitations imposed on them by Congress, and that's what the court did in the cross-state air pollution rule. By the way, Texas was caught up in this rulemaking process without even an opportunity to be heard and to challenge the modeling of the Environmental Protection Agency. So due process is a pretty fundamental notion in our laws and in our jurisprudence, and Texas in that instance was denied any opportunity for basic due process of law, another reason why the court made the right ruling. Well, the third case that has drawn the ire of some critics across the aisle on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals has to do with two presidential recess appointments. Now, every president basically has made recess appointments, but no president has done what this president has done, and it violated the Constitution when doing so. In other words, basically President Obama said, notwithstanding the fact that the Constitution gives advice and consent responsibility to the Senate, that's in the Constitution, the president basically in this instance decided when Congress was going to be in recess for purpose of invoking this extraordinary power, and basically said that the president was going to decide when we were in recess, and essentially, as some pundits said, basically the president was claiming an authority to be able to appoint judges using the recess appointment power when we're taking a lunch break. And that can't be the law, and it isn't the law, and that's what the D.C. Circuit Court said. So the D.C. Circuit Court said that President Obama's legal rationale for appointments and the role of the Senate in advice and consent and the confirmation proceeding, they said would, quote, eviscerate the Constitution's separation of powers, close quote. That's what the D.C. Circuit said about President Obama's claim to extraordinary power to make recess appointments and bypass the confirmation role of the United States Senate in the Constitution. Well, you might wonder that if the court has actually been pretty even-handed in terms of its decision-making process, and you might wonder if it has the lightest caseload per judge in the nation, and there are other courts that need the help a lot more, you might wonder what's going on here. Why does President Obama feel so strongly? Why does Senator Reid feel so strongly? Why does the distinguished chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee that I serve on feel so strongly that they want to move these three judges through, even though there's no need for these judges on the D.C. Circuit Court? Well, I'm sorry to reach the conclusion, but I think the evidence is overwhelming that what the president is trying to do by nominating these three unneeded judges to this critical court, the second most powerful court in the nation, is he's trying to pack the court in order to affect the outcomes. Now, I know my friends across the aisle don't like that term, court packing. Students of history remember when Franklin Delano Roosevelt claimed the power to appoint additional Supreme Court justices, and that was held to be an unconstitutional court packing. But I don't know what else you would call this. If you're going to try to jam three additional judges on this court that are not needed, the second most important court in the nation, in order to change the outcome of these decisions and to rubber stamp the administration's expansive policies, I don't know what else you'd call it other than court packing. So I think a fair interpretation or fair definition of court packing is when you add judges to a court for the explicit purpose of securing favorable rulings. And that's exactly what Democrats are trying to do and with these nominations. Madam President, I would ask unanimous consent for an additional 2 minutes.
Is there objection? Without objection.
So I'd like to quote our friend Senator Reid, the Majority Leader of the United States Senate, because his candor is, again, remarkable and awfully clear. He said, "We're focusing very intently on the D.C. Circuit. We need at least one more." By that he means one more judge. He says there are 3 vacancies. We need at least one more, and that will switch the majority. So when the court sits en banc, when all judges decide to sit on the most important cases, then President Obama will have a majority of nominees on that court, and they'll be able to outvote the Republican nominees on the court. So here's Senator Schumer. You can see he's complaining about some of the cases that I mentioned a moment ago. And he concludes, "We'll fill up the D.C. Circuit Court one way or another." So I believe that the evidence is overwhelming that the motivation at play here is, one, to make sure that this court becomes a rubber stamp for the big government policies of this administration. That's why they're ignoring appellate courts that actually need the help, and they're trying to stack the court in the second highest court in the land. And that's why they're also threatening, we heard a little bit of that today, rattling that saber once again, threatening the nuclear option to try to confirm judges with a simple majority rather than the 60-vote cloture requirement under the Senate rules. So we have a good faith solution to this. This is Senator Grassley's bill, which would reallocate these 3 unneeded judges to places where they're actually needed. This is the kind of idea that our colleagues across the aisle embraced previously when one of the judges from the D.C. Circuit was reallocated to the Ninth Circuit in 2007, I believe it was. So if our friends across the aisle continue to move ahead with their court-packing gambit, it will make this chamber even more polarized than it already is. I only hope they choose a different course, but this is why we're committed on this side of the aisle to stopping these nominations to these unneeded judges in these courts, in this court, and making sure that judges are placed where they are needed so they can engage in the fair and efficient administration of justice. Madam President, I yield the floor. Thank you, sir.
Madam President.
Senator from Michigan.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to enter into a colloquy with my great friend from Missouri, Senator Blunt, but I have to say, I just have to make a comment first, if I might, if my colleague will excuse me. And I just have to say, I am amazed to hear the word court packing when what we're talking about is trying to fill 3 vacancies on a court. I didn't hear that before with other presidents. So hopefully we can just fill vacancies and do it in a bipartisan way. Madam President, I very much want to thank really a great friend and colleague, Senator Blunt, for joining me today on the floor and for joining me in leadership on some very important community mental health legislation. And I think we have a real opportunity to get something done. And so with consent, we would like to proceed with the colloquy. Thank you. And we want to do this today because today marks the 50th anniversary to the day that President John F. Kennedy signed into law the Community Mental Health Act. The good news is he signed this act. The unfortunate news is that it was the last act he signed in his life. But we today want to recognize what that has meant to so many people across the country. This put in place the ability to serve people in the community that have mental health issues, rather than just being in institutions. Being able to serve people closer to home or at home, to be able to give them the opportunity to get the help they need and still be active and successful in the community. I think so many of us have been touched by mental health issues, which, by the way, is part of physical. It's not mental and physical health. I think it's about time. I know my friend would agree that we start treating illnesses above the neck differently than illnesses below the neck. I mean, it's about comprehensive health care. But we've all been touched in some way. For me, my father went undiagnosed with a bipolar disorder for 10 years when I was growing up. When he finally got the help he needed, the medication he needed, he was able to work and be successful for the rest of his life. I want to make sure every family, Madam President, has that opportunity. I know for President Kennedy, it was his younger sister, Rosemary, who was institutionalized in the early 1940s that brought him to this issue, as well as other passionate concerns that he had as well. But President Kennedy saw a way to improve the lives of people like his sister living with a mental illness by providing service in the community and, frankly, lowering the stigma on mental health. And we still have a long way to go there on lowering the stigma and understanding that it is, in most occasions, a physiological change in the brain, a chemical imbalance, something that needs to be treated appropriately and is certainly not a choice by an individual. But President Kennedy thought we needed to make sure we are providing the very best treatment for people in the community. And in his statement to Congress, he wrote, "We need a new type of health facility, one which will return mental health care to the mainstream of American medicine and at the same time upgrade mental health services." We've worked together in a bipartisan way since then. The Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, which was championed by our friend and colleague Senator Pete Domenici and Paul Wellstone and Ted Kennedy and Patrick Kennedy in the House, became law, which said we have to have parity in how insurance companies treat mental health and physical health. I was pleased to get those provisions into health reform, but there's more to do, and that's why we're here. And so I want to turn to my friend from Missouri, who has been a great partner on this, and ask, as we go forward, what your thoughts are on this day and what we should be doing to continue this important legacy.
Well, first of all, let me say that I do think this is a critical topic, and it's a moment when there are many reasons we should be turning to it. As you said, Senator Stabenow, this is the day that 50 years ago President Kennedy signed the Community Mental Health Act. He called it then a bold new approach. And frankly, while some things have happened in the 50 years since then and now, there haven't been many bold new approaches in that 50 years. This is a topic that, for whatever reason, our society hasn't dealt with in ways that have been satisfactory in making great changes. In fact, some of the things we've done in other areas have really made it harder for communities and families to work with people who have a behavioral challenge, to find out the information that person doesn't want to share with them. All of us can probably think of some family that this has happened to, where you still have an ongoing commitment to that adult son or daughter or mom or dad. You're part of what they're doing. You're paying some of the bills. You're doing whatever. But the information that you really would benefit from knowing about is just hard to get to. Or the requirement that somebody follow up on a court-ordered procedure is difficult to enforce and make that happen. And I think this is one of the times when we really need to be thinking, what do we need to do to make this challenge work better? First of all, it's a widespread problem, but it's not a problem that's untreatable. I think there's one statistic I've seen. In fact, it's the National Institute of Mental Health. 1 in 4 adults suffer from a mental disorder that's diagnosable and in virtually every case treatable. 1 in 4. So this is not a stigma. This is not something that you're the only person this has ever happened to, or that your loved one's the only person this has ever happened to. This is something that many families understand. Many people have a challenge that never gets diagnosed, frankly. And creating a way for that to happen, where we make it easier, we make it more comfortable, we make it affordable, whatever we're doing to allow that, in almost every case, treatable problem to be diagnosed and treatable is important. You know, one of the things that you and I started talking about really at almost the very first of this year, we've been now talking about this for almost 10 months. And of course it was after the tragedy at Newtown. The one thing we know for sure is that somebody that has a mental health problem is much more likely to be the victim of a crime than they are to be the perpetrator of a crime. But the other thing we know is that as we look at these tragedies we've seen happen in our country in the last few years, that the one common denominator, whether it was in Newtown or Aurora or Tucson or at the Navy Yard or Virginia Tech, whether it was at a supermarket or in a theater or on a college campus, the one thing that we saw that in every case was this was somebody that had a behavioral problem, a mental health problem that hadn't been dealt with in the right way. And that really, in many ways, has turned the attention of the country back to a problem that, for whatever reason, we just as soon apparently not talk about. In fact, when the Senate committee that deals with mental health had a hearing in January of this year on mental health, Madam President, it was the first time since 2007 that there had been a Senate hearing devoted to this topic, a topic that, again, the National Institute of Health said 1 out of 4 adults is challenged by. The Senate in 6 years hadn't talked about it in any kind of official, focused way. And so that's why, Senator Stabenow, you and I have been working to try to, frankly, take advantage of the moment. And I think in the principal piece of legislation we've been working on, the Excellence in Mental Health Act, we also have a model there that works. A couple of different things done, and one, of course, was to expand the federally qualified health center concept to where if you wanted to add behavioral health, you could, under the same rules and regulations, and frankly, you'd be walking in the same door that your neighbors were walking in. And we also created ways for community health centers, the very health centers that President Kennedy's legislation that he signed created, to add some of the advantages to being a federally qualified center to being a community mental health center. And certainly your efforts in that, and I know we both have stories to tell, other things we're working on as well. But, you know, we've had great response from the community mental health centers, great response from veterans. And you might want to talk about that a little bit, because I know you've particularly been engaged in a lot of these discussions with veterans groups who say if our veterans just had a place to go that was close, right, where their neighbors were going, perhaps for some other kind of behavioral help, and we've got a wide base of support from our veterans groups as well as our health care groups on this.
Well, and if
Senator's time has expired.
If we might ask for an additional 2 minutes.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Thank you. Let me just to add to what the senator from Missouri has indicated, because our veterans are coming home. We know that at least 200,000 of our veterans coming home will go into the community. And I see our distinguished chair of the Senate Veterans Committee on the floor right now, and thank you for all of your work. But in addition to the VA system, where we are strengthening mental health services, we know that many will come home to the community. They'll be looking to an outpatient clinic, or they'll be looking to some place in the community for help. And so the reason we have strong support from the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans Organization is because our Excellence in Mental Health legislation, which creates a behavioral health clinic model based on what has been done in community health that has worked so well, will create an opportunity for those veterans coming home to get support and help in the community. One of the most difficult statistics to talk about is the fact that 22 of our veterans are committing suicide every day. 22 every day. That is unacceptable. We need to make sure that families, that veterans have the support that they need so that when they come home, they can get the help that they need. I am very proud of the fact we have about 50 organizations supporting the Excellence in Mental Health Act, sheriffs and police officers, because most likely if somebody needs help, they end up in the jail, or they end up in the emergency room, or they don't end up at a mental health facility. And so what we're proposing is something that would provide a 24-hour emergency psychiatric facility coupled with high-quality community mental health services. The time is now to do this. I would turn back for closing remarks to my friend from Missouri.
Just say, I think in both of our states, we've seen our states lead in this. Missouri's clearly been a pioneer in mental health efforts. Our community health centers, many of them have added behavioral health in the last few years. There are other pieces of legislation out there that I think add to this. Mental health first aid, where people who, particularly dealing with young people, can take a course and they don't become people who can deal with your problem, but they may help you recognize that you have a problem and somebody needs to deal with this. I just agree with Senator Stabenow. The time is now. Actually, we're probably beyond the time we should have done this, but we would be ill-advised to go further down this road without looking at this system, figuring out how we can improve it. And I think in the Senate there are many bipartisan ideas, and I really believe that the Excellence in Community Health Act is right at the top of that list. But we need to look at this and do it now, and I look forward to seeing something happen on this, I hope, between now and the end of the year.
Madam President, I would like, with consent, to put an entire statement into the record and thank again my friend from Missouri for his commitment and working together with so many colleagues across the aisle on a bipartisan basis. I believe we will get this done, and we will now, on this 50th anniversary of President Kennedy signing the Community Mental Health Act, complete the circle in terms of mental health parity in our country.
Without objection. Without objection.
Madam President?
Senator from Vermont.
First of all, I want to congratulate the Senator from Michigan and the Senator from Missouri for touching on what is obviously a very, very serious national issue, and that is how we deal with the crisis of mental health in this country. And I want to thank both of them for the work that they are doing. Madam President, I want to say a few words as a member of the Conference Committee on the budget, which is hoping to avert another government shutdown and come up with a sensible long-term budget for our country. Madam President, I think the first point that I would make is I am always amazed that when I return from Vermont and come here to Capitol Hill, how different the worldview is in here as it is to the real world, whether it's Vermont or when I travel other states around the country. It almost seems like we are living on two separate planets. As a member of the Budget Committee, I understand, as do the American people, that a $17 trillion national debt and a $700 billion deficit is a serious issue that must be addressed. And the American people know that. But you know what else they understand? They understand that there is an even more important issue out there, and that is that real unemployment today is close to 14%. Youth unemployment, an issue that the Pope Francis, is beginning to talk about a great deal in this country, is approximately 20%. African American youth unemployment is over 40%. And what the American people are saying is, yes, deal with the deficit, but do not forget that we continue to have a major economic crisis with millions and millions of Americans unemployed, and for many other Americans who are working, their wages are deplorably low. We have millions of folks working for $8 or $9 an hour who cannot take care of their families under those wages. So while the middle class is disappearing and poverty today, the number of people living in poverty is at an all-time high, we also have another dynamic that we don't talk about too much here for obvious reasons, and that is that the wealthiest people are doing phenomenally well. Corporate profits are at record-breaking levels, and the gap between the very, very wealthy and everybody else is growing wider and wider. Now, we are surrounded by lobbyists representing the wealthy and large corporations, and they don't kind of like that discussion, so we don't talk about that too much, but it remains absolutely true. Madam President, when I go home and talk to Vermonters, or I go around the country, what people tell me and what the polls tell me is the American people, regardless of political persuasion, by the way, are in significant agreement about a lot of issues. You won't see that reflected here, but the American people are in significant agreements. If you ask the American people, I suspect in North Dakota, Vermont, Maryland, or any place else, they say, do you think we should cut Social Security? Do you think we should cut Medicare? Do you think we should cut Medicaid? Do you know what the American people say overwhelmingly? No. These are tough economic times. Poverty among seniors is going up. People are worried about health care costs. These programs are vital to the survival of so many of our people. Do not cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That's not what Bernie Sanders is saying. That is what the American people are saying. That is what Democrats are saying. That is what Republicans are saying. That is what independents are saying. That is what people who agree with the Tea Party are saying. Not a whole lot of dispute outside of Washington. Inside Washington, the picture becomes a little bit different. And we have virtually all Republicans talking about cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Got the President talking about cutting Social Security, Medicare. We got Democrats, some Democrats talking about it. But that's not what the American people believe. According to the latest poll that I have seen on this issue, it was a National Journal United Technologies poll. 81% of the American people do not want to cut Medicare. 76% of the American people do not want to cut Social Security. And 60% of the American people do not want to cut Medicaid. So I have a very, very radical idea for my colleagues is, hey, what about occasionally, don't overdo it, but occasionally listen to the people who sent us here. And that is that they don't want to cut these terribly important programs. And second of all, what do the American people want? And what they want is that we invest in our infrastructure and we create the millions of jobs that we desperately need. According to a Gallup poll, March 3rd, 2013, 75% of the American people, that includes 56% of Republicans, 74% of independents, 93% of the Democrats support, quote, a federal jobs creation program that would spend government money designed to create more than 1 million new jobs. So the American people are saying, yeah, deficit is important, what is more important is creating jobs, rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure is one way to do it. Don't cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And what else are the American people saying? Well, not too surprisingly, when we see so much income and wealth inequality in America, the American people do believe that when 95% of all new income in the last few years has gone to the top 1%, that maybe, given the fact that the wealthy are doing phenomenally well, maybe they might be asked to pay a little bit more in taxes. Maybe we might want to end all of the corporate loopholes that currently exist. Again, that's not Bernie Sanders. January 29, 2013, poll by Hart Research Associates. 66% of the American people believe the wealthiest 2% should pay more in taxes, and 64% of the American people believe that large corporations should pay more in taxes than they do today. Well, guess what? The American people have given us a solution to the major crises facing the American people. They want to invest in our economy. They want to create jobs. They want to ask the wealthy and large corporations to pay more in taxes. They do not want to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That's the real world. But then you come back to Washington, what are people saying? Let's cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Let's not invest in our infrastructure and create jobs. And in fact, let's give more tax breaks to the wealthy and large corporations. So this is Alice in Wonderland world. American people are saying one thing, and the lobbyists around here and many members of Congress are saying something very different. Madam President, when we talk about the deficit, which in my view is an important issue, and we should be proud, by the way, that we have cut the deficit in half in the last few years. We have more to go, but we should take some credit for that. It is very important for us to remember how we got to where we are today, $17 trillion national debt and a $650 or so billion deficit. And I find it interesting that some of those people who are most active in causing the deficit are now standing up saying, oh, I'm really worried about this deficit that I helped cause, and therefore we got to cut all these programs that working people and children and the elderly need. So let us take a brief look back into the recent past and find out how we got to where we are today and who voted for those programs. As I hope most Americans know, in January 2001, when President Clinton left office and President Bush took over, this country had a $236 billion surplus. $236 billion surplus. That is a quite large surplus. And what the Congressional Budget Office projected is that the 10-year budget surplus would be of $5.6 trillion. There would be a huge increase in our budget surplus. The projections were very, very strong. And in fact, they projected that we could erase the national debt by 2011. Imagine that. That was where we were heading. Well, Bush took office, a number of things happened. We went to war in Afghanistan and Iraq. I voted for the war in Afghanistan. I strongly opposed the war in Iraq. But be that as it may, many of my friends who are great deficit hawks, they forgot to pay for those wars. Those wars are estimated to cost between somewhere around $6 trillion. So folks who are standing up today saying, gee, we just can't afford nutrition programs for children, they didn't have a problem voting for 2 wars and not paying for that. They also did not have a problem voting for huge tax breaks that went to the wealthiest people in this country, and they also did not have a problem voting for a Medicare Part D prescription drug program written by the insurance companies, by the way, by the pharmaceutical industry, which also added to the deficit. So the point that I am making is that many of the folks who are standing up here demanding cuts in Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid voted for 2 wars, tax breaks for the rich, and an unfunded Medicare Part D program. And then on top of all that, we had the Wall Street crash, which resulted in less revenue coming into the federal government. Add all of that stuff up, you have a large deficit. So, Madam President, let me conclude by simply saying this. At a time when we have massive wealth and income inequality in America, something we should focus on from both a moral perspective as well as an economic perspective, at a time when the middle class is disappearing and millions of people are working longer hours for lower wages, at a time when we have the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world, at a time when senior poverty is increasing, at a time when we have 20% youth unemployment in this country, in my humble opinion, you do not balance the budget on the backs of the most vulnerable people in this country, working people, the elderly, the children, the sick, and low-income people. That is not what you do. What you do is go to those people who are doing very, very well and say to them, you know what, welcome to the United States of America. You are part of our country. You're part of our economy. This country has problems now. You, if you're a large corporation, 1 out of 4 large corporations paying nothing in federal income taxes, you're going to have to start paying your taxes. You can't just stash your money in the Cayman Islands and in other tax havens. And if you're an extremely wealthy person doing very well, you're going to have to contribute more in tax revenue. Bottom line is we need to create jobs in this country. We need to protect the most vulnerable people in this country, and we need to do it in a way that is morally right and which makes good economic sense. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor.
Don't put it up, wait.
Madam President.
Senator from Maryland.
Madam President, this afternoon I joined with Senator Warner and Senator Klobuchar and Senator Casey to point out just how much harm was caused to this country because we are governing from one manufactured crisis to another. The cost of the government shutdown, the cost of coming so close to defaulting on our obligations, the fact that we are governing through automatic across-the-board cuts known as sequestration, all have hurt our economy. It's been particularly difficult for the people in the state I represent of Maryland, because in our region, we have so many federal workers, so many federal facilities. We saw during the shutdown 10% of our workforce works for the federal government. So we saw so many small businesses in our community that depend upon the federal workforce that literally had nobody in their restaurants and their shops. Consumer confidence was at an all-time low. And there have been national estimates as to the amount of harm caused by these government shutdowns. Standard & Poor's said $24 billion was taken out of our economy as a result of the government shutdown. Add that to the extra cost because we came so close to defaulting on our debt. Add that to the fact that since 2011 we've been living under sequestration. The estimates is that we have lost about 900,000 jobs from this crisis management, self-inflicted crisis, I might add, Madam President. Now, the impact of that, I could give you many, many, many examples, but let me just give you one. I've had a chance, I'm very proud that the National Institutes of Health are homed in the state of Maryland. Of course, their impact is all over this country, including in the state of Massachusetts, has a major impact on the work done at NIH. And as a result of sequestration, then as a result of the government shutdown, hundreds of grants could not be awarded. I think it was 700 by sequestration alone. Now, what does that mean? That means young researchers don't get a grant. They may stay with research. They may go to a different field. They may go to a different country. It means that maybe the cure for Alzheimer's will be put back a little bit, or the influenza vaccine will be put back a little bit. And literally, lives are at risk, but also our economy is at risk because the research done there supports so many private sector jobs. I could give you the same example at FDA or at NIST or Beltsville Agricultural Research Center or Fort Meade. We go many, many examples of how our country has been harmed. You cannot govern from one manufactured crisis to another. So my message is that I hope we'll get a budget agreement. I know the budget conferees met this week. That will give some predictability to our economy, eliminate sequestration, and give a pro-growth budget that we invest in education and research and modern roads and bridges and transit systems. That's what we need for our country. So I want to share with my colleagues what I've been doing in my own state of Maryland, because I am very optimistic about America's ability to globally compete if we stop these self-inflicted crises. So I've had this Made in Maryland tour that I have been doing throughout the state of Maryland, where I've visited many, many businesses in my state. I must tell you, I want to give credit to my colleague in the House, Congressman Hoyer, who's saying "Make it in America" has really caught on, that we can make it in America. So I took my friend Congressman Hoyer's suggestion and I went around Maryland to meet with different companies in our state. And I must tell you, Maryland businesses are the best in the world. The best in the world. I know I'm a little biased about Maryland, but they're best in the world on innovation and creativity. So let me just give you a few examples that may not be self-evident, like the Paul Reed Smith Guitar Factory. Now, Madam President, that guitar factory is located on the eastern shore of Maryland in a very little community, a small community called Stevensonville. Over 200 people work there, and they produce the best guitars in the world. They're sold all over the world. Santana's guitar was produced there. It's now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's such an incredible instrument, not only in beauty but in sound. And it's run right here in Maryland in the USA. 200 jobs. That's what we've done, over 200 jobs. Let me give you another example of a company I visited during my Made in Maryland tour, the Volvo Mack truck plant located in Hagerstown, Maryland, one of the largest employers in western Maryland. Huge number of jobs, good-paying jobs that are created at Volvo. They make the most efficient truck engine in the world, produced right in Maryland, in the United States of America. The most innovative, creative way to deal with the problem of efficiency on trucks. I visited the Ernest Mayer, which makes these brick pavers and concrete. It's very close to where we are here near the nation's capital. I mention that because we can do manufacturing in America and we can compete in manufacturing, but they're developing the technology for pervious concrete. Why is that important? It's critically important to our environment. Now, I take great pride in the Chesapeake Bay and the work we're doing to clean up the Chesapeake Bay. One of the major sources for pollution in the Chesapeake Bay comes every time we have a storm, and all the runoff goes into the tributaries and lead into the Chesapeake Bay, causing a lot of pollutants to come into the bay, creating dead zones. Well, if we have pervious concrete, allowing the water to seep rather than to flow, it cuts down dramatically the amount of pollution. Well, the Ernest Mayer Company is doing something about that and doing something about cleaning up our environment as well as selling a product that is well received around the country. We have Marlin Steel located in Baltimore. I mentioned that's a small specialty steel company. They're growing. Their jobs are growing. Their product is sold all over the world. 100% of the ingredients come from the United States, and it is exported around the world because it is a quality product. That's steel. Steel manufactured in Maryland, United States of America, exported to other countries. Atlas Container, it's another Maryland manufacturer with a national market. Visited them. They're doing great. Their sales are up. Their employment is up. Let me mention a couple areas which I think is particularly important to the presiding officer in Massachusetts, and that's the craft beer industry. I've been up to Massachusetts, and I've enjoyed some of your craft beers. Over 100,000 jobs in the craft beer industry in this country. And it's growing. You've heard about times that are tough, not in the craft beer industry. It's growing. I visited Flying Dog in Frederick and Heavy Seas in Baltimore. They're coming out with new and seasonal beers, which is keeping a market growing using creativity besides having a very fine product. And it's not just in the craft beer industry, it's also in the wine industry. We have about 64 wineries in our state. I visited one that's in Montgomery County, Maryland. I don't know, most people know that Montgomery County, Maryland produces one of the best wines in this country and can compete internationally. We're very proud of what's done at Sugarloaf Mountain Winery in Montgomery County, Maryland. I could go on. I'm going to talk about BrainScope in Bethesda because I want to talk about some of the high-tech jobs that are done here, and I'm proud of what's done in Maryland. BrainScope has developed a way in which they can have a portable device available in the battlefield that can tell the severity of a head wound as to whether the warrior needs immediate attention in order to save his life because of a brain injury or whether it can be taking a little more time before that treatment. So they have developed a portable device, very inexpensive, I might say, in its operations, that is attached, gives you the type of test necessary to determine your brain waves and can determine the severity of your head injury. The military is very appreciative of this discovery. I must tell you, I think the total cost was about $10 million to develop. And think about the lives it will save. And think about the application of this technology to our community life. And I think all of us are always nervous when we see our children or grandchildren on the playing field of sporting events, knowing how common now head injuries are. Well, this technology can be used on the playing field to determine the severity, whether the person who has suffered a head injury needs to seek immediate medical attention because it's life-threatening, they say a structural problem, or whether they just have to sit out for a while or with the severity of the injury. Well, that's what's being done in my state of Maryland. That's the type of innovation and creativity that's taking place in Maryland. And I can name dozens of other small innovative companies that are working in the biosciences and the life sciences and the cybersecurity areas that are creating ways. At BrainScope, they started with 2 employees. They now have over 20. Common story. These are good-paying jobs created here in Maryland in the United States of America. Lyons Brothers in Owings Mills. If you ever seen a uniform with emblems on it, it was most likely done in Lyons Brothers in my state. They have figured out the way in which they can produce this product, which is used not only for sports gear, it's used by the United States government for its uniforms, it's used by the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. They do all that. And it's right here in Maryland in the United States of America. Now, what is common in each of these companies? They're innovators. They find a creative way to create and expand markets. They're creating more jobs, and they're creating good-paying jobs. And I tell you, Madam President, it's particularly appropriate with the President who represents the state of Massachusetts, which is one of the great states for innovation and creativity. And what we could just name just about every state in this country where we have seen creativity. We can duplicate this. We have duplicated this throughout our country. But the message is clear. Our country can take off, but we have to give predictability to our businesses. We've got to make decisions. That's why the work being done in the conference committee on the budget is so important. We can't go through another manufactured crisis, another shutdown, another threatened default on our debt, the continuation of sequestration. That needs to end. We need to have a budget that allows for the type of government partnership that allows for that type of economic growth, the basic research, the educated workforce, the modern roads and infrastructure and energy systems. That's what we need to have so that the companies I mentioned can continue to lead the world in innovation, creativity, creating the jobs we need, the good-paying jobs in America. If we act, I am confident that America will compete and win global competition. Made in Maryland, it's been a huge success that has been duplicated all over our country. Let us act, get our work done, so we truly can make it in America. With that, Madam President, I would suggest the absence of the quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.